Good evening and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this informational session tonight. This informational session is on the Mid-Michigan Dam restoration projects, on the EGLE permitting process for downstream residents. My name is Ryan Blazek. I'm with EGLE's Environmental Support Division. I'm just going to be helping to moderate this hearing or this informational session tonight. But before we get too far into it, I just have a couple logistical things to go over with you. All right, if you haven't done a session like this or a webinar with us before, just let you know all lines are going to be muted. So you'll be able to hear us, everything we're saying, but we can't hear you. We're going to be using the Q&A box tonight. So feel free to submit your questions at any time using that Q&A box in the toolbar. We're going to have an question and answer session kind of at the end of tonight's presentations, and we'll go through how to ask a question again at that time. And then also we are recording this session. In a couple of days, it'll be on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to watch it again if you choose, or forward it on to someone. All right, with that, I would like to invite our first speaker, Jared Sanders, who is the Assistant Division Director with Water Resources Division. Welcome, Jared. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, hey, good evening, everyone. I'm just going to take a couple minutes here to sort of quick level set the sort of expectations for tonight and the things that we'll cover here. So obviously the focus tonight is any issues and how they might affect downstream residents, and then, you know, hopefully how you would be able to participate in our permitting process. So the laws and rules that apply to these proposed dam reconstruction projects, they apply to all four of the dams. But tonight we're going to mostly focus on Sanford for a couple different reasons. The first is that that's the most downstream dam, and because of that, it has sort of this controlling factor, has the most potential to impact downstream residents. And then the second reason is that we expect the application for Sanford to be complete in the very near future here, probably within the next 30 days or so. So once the application is complete, it'll be put on public notice, and in all likelihood, we'll hold a public hearing on the permit application. And that is really your opportunity to participate in that process. So it's timely in terms of, we expect, you know, the things that we'll talk about here tonight, you'll have an opportunity to participate very soon. All of the dams are going through fairly rigorous environmental reviews under our Inland Lakes and Streams and Wetlands statute, but tonight we're going to focus really on the safety of the dams, and then the sort of potential impacts for flooding downstream. That's really what we're here for tonight. So assuring that sort of safety and that the proposed dams won't flood anyone upstream or downstream is really highly technical work. That work's been going on for 3 years, both in the Four Lakes Task Force and with our staff have been engaged that whole time. There's some really smart people that have been working on these issues for a long time now. So at the end of the day, I've been here about 20 years. I can't think of a project that I've worked on that'll be as highly vetted as this will be by the time we make a permit decision, which will be, you know, later on this year. So and I want to be really clear that the downstream residents, you guys are a really important stakeholders, and that you're also protected by this process that's been occurring and is going to continue to occur here in the future. So we're going to start with a project overview, short project overview from the Four Lakes Task Force team. And then you're going to hear from our actual permitting staff about our review and how that works and the things that we look at. And then a little bit of time spent, you know, teaching you how you can best participate in that process. And then we'll follow with a Q&A period too. So that's all I really have to get started. At this point, I'll just kick it to Dave. Hopefully your team's ready to roll, and we'll get going here. So thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks, Jared. And I think Steve's going to project our slides here. So I'm Dave Kepler with the Four Lakes Task Force. Today we have Carlin Grundeman as from GEI Consulting. She's been our geotechnical engineer, our senior lead in that. She's also the deputy program manager, and she's going to be focusing on the dam safety side. And then Spicer Group has been our owner engineer, and Steve is a floodplain engineer, an expert in that area to contribute. So I'll have a few slides, and then we'll get to the key experts to give a quick overview, and then you can come back on. So with that, Steve, maybe go to the next slide. Did want to make, it's been 3 years almost since the failure of the dams. There's a significant focus on not only the recovery, but the design around restoration. And I think you'll see by the timeline we show the 4 dams and the lake restoration has been managed as one system. In other words, we looked at the northern dams first to make sure we understood the flow downstream. We looked at the issues that were on obviously Edenville and others, and but the other dams as well, and managed a kind of a design principles that kind of went across all 4 dams. It was informed by new range studies that we did. We were working on these before the dams failed. We redid precipitation or range studies to inform us on the probable maximum storms, and then new flood studies that were completed based on those. So we have very current data on that. We were informed in the design by the independent forensic teams reports that came out. They were commissioned by Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, and the state. And we were also during the recovery period, the U.S. Army Corps had come in and done semi-quantitative risk assessments on both Secord and Smallwood, and we engaged with those studies. And then we ourselves have done a significant amount of studies through this or commissioned them. And then also we looking at the management of the dams, not only from a floodplain and dam safety, but from an environmental point of view as well. Significant study and alternative selections looked at during that period of time. And the other reason they're managed together, it is an interdependency of operations. So we want to design a dam like Sanford to make sure it considers the flow rates coming down at it and how the other dams are operated. And we want to have consistency in measurements throughout the system and how we can report those. So we've kind of built that into it as well. All this is focused on safety. We're using kind of established best practice, I'd say, across the country. Our standards that we've set here in terms of capacity are greater than the state standards as it relates to, if you would look at prescribed standards. We actually went through a risk-informed decision-making process, and that'll be covered. And we've also had a lot of study on the restoration, not only as it deals with restoring during our recovery period, but also the restoration will come from the lake flow and how we design the dams to be helping improve the environment as we move forward and fill the lakes back. We've also looked at this from a point of view of not only the aspect of building the dams now, but can we sustain them from an operations point of view? Can the community afford the reinvestment in them to keep them running healthy and do the maintenance? And is the financial structure there to do that? We believe it is. And we're also in the model of running them in terms of the concept of run of the river, where these were before hydro power dams. They were run in peaking mode. The levels of the lake changed more frequently than to manage more, energy generation. With run of the river, what comes in the lake comes out of the lake. It tries to be a natural flow, which will have a less volatility and smoother run as we go forward. But it's also an important concept of how we design the dams, and that'll be covered a little bit later on. And just the next slide is the kind of timeline. And for those that have been at our webcast, you've seen those. We've spent the first 2 years in parallel doing both the design and a significant amount of recovery. During that period, almost over $57 million were spent. And we were doing the design as we were doing this management of recovery. That's recovery phase is fundamentally done. The engineering is fundamentally done on actually all 4 dams now. And we are in the process of permitting both Edenville and Sanford are nearing completion. Sanford is for sure, and we're submitting that, have been submitted. And then the other 2 dams are actually permitted and under construction. So currently we're looking at Secord and Smallwood to be, are under construction now, to be complete by the end of 2024. And we're looking for Sanford Dam and Edenville Dam to start this year. Sanford is full restoration permitting right now in Edenville because we have some issues around endangered species and how the floodplain gets reported through FEMA, that it's still not all there, but we are doing the embankment, the things that relate to dam safety embankment this year, so we can be ready to pull that project. So it's the one that has a little bit more uncertainty of when it will be implemented, but if all goes well, we're trying to get that implemented by the end of 2025 or close to it as well. So that's kind of where we are on the project. I think that's just to give you a perspective of why we're talking to you today as it relates to Sanford. And with that, I'll pass it over to Carlin, who's going to kind of cover the dam safety aspects and how we design the dams.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Dave. All right, so now that we've kind of taken a look at the schedule here, let's talk a little bit more about the improvements that are planned for the dams. So just kind of taking a step back here, following the May 2020 event and the initial stabilization efforts, these dams were evaluated to identify, their physical deficiencies of the structures, and then also defining the existing hydraulic capacity for each. So based on those evaluations and selection of the design criteria, a number of improvements were designed to make the dam safer and to provide, significantly more capacity to pass water. Seepage, things like seepage and erosion potential through the embankments are minimized. We've got things like the installations of new hydraulic cutoff walls, added protection downstream with granular filters and tow drains. Downstream slopes will be flattened to increase the stability. And then we've got things like concrete repairs at all the primary spillways that'll be completed. In addition to that, we've got, primary spillways will have those larger crest gates and new auxiliary spillways to be constructed to increase the hydraulic capacity, as Dave mentioned, and then new low-level outlets will be included to pass the base flows, and that really helps promote that run-of-river natural flow condition. Then we also had a kind of a couple more slides later on this, but selection of the spillway capacity design criteria was completed following, a conservative risk-based approach. And the design criteria is referred to as the inflow design flood, or an IDF. I'll get into that selection process in more detail in a bit, but the IDF selected for each dam exceeds the current state of Michigan requirements and is a capacity increase of, depending which dam you're talking about, between 100 and 300% over the existing capacity. All right, Dan, if you want to go to the next slide. All right, so beginning with Secord, I'll kind of give you a rundown of what the deficiencies were that were identified and what we're doing to improve those. So in the upper right corner, you can kind of, see that list of deficiencies that were identified, and then kind of gives you a little snapshot of the design plan set here. Lower left is the sheet pile wall going in for the hydraulic cutoff. That wall is installed along the crest of the dam, and it extends from, so looking downstream, when I refer to right and left, extends from the right abutment to the primary spillway concrete training wall, and then from the powerhouse to the left abutment. We've got a new primary spillway crest gate that will be installed, and the powerhouse will be transitioned to function as a new low-level outlet. We also have a roller compacted concrete, or RCC, auxiliary spillway that'll be constructed on the left embankment, and when that is activated, water will flow over that RCC crest into that stilling basin that you see there, that kind of large, very clearly graded area, and it'll discharge out through the chute down to the tailwater area. Then we've got some large stone placed down at the discharge to protect the bottom of the spillway from erosion. Lots of riprap upstream and downstream to prevent erosion as well. Granular filter and tow drain will be installed on the flattened downstream slopes, so that kind of increases the stability of the dam itself. and then a number of concrete repairs, reinforcing the existing buttresses. Structurally compromised sections will be fixed, and then there'll be a micropile and tensioning system on the right embankment to support the right training wall during construction. So you can move on to Smallwood. So here, this one's a little bit simpler. We've got embankments to be flattened and armored on the downstream side. Again, same kind of granular filter that'll help prevent internal erosion that'll be installed on the downstream slopes. New crest gates here at the primary spillway as well, with the new low level outlet. And you'll have this new auxiliary spillway that you see on the right side of your screen here. And that'll be at this particular dam, it'll be a rock line spillway on the left embankment. Again, some concrete repairs, fixing the, reinforcing the buttresses and the damaged concrete, and doing some modifications to the powerhouse to raise the crest to minimum elevations. All right, so we can move on to Edenville. Lots going on here. Obviously, Edenville's a big dam, a lot of embankment to work on, and we've got the breach there. So just kind of starting from spillway side of things, there'll be a new crest gate at both the Tittabawassee and the Tobacco spillways. And then we'll have a new auxiliary spillway constructed in the breach channel area. That will be a labyrinth spillway, and we'll kind of route back down to the tailwater side of the Tittabawassee River. There will be a new low-level outlet, both on the Tobacco and the Tittabawassee sides. Again, embankments really across the board will be flattened, and hydraulic cutoff wall will be installed along the entire alignment from the right abutment at Tobacco across M30 to the right wall of the former powerhouse at the Tittabawassee spillway. So really that whole section will have a hydraulic cutoff wall. It'll consist primarily of a soil cement bentonite wall, and then there are sections that will contain steel sheet pile to tie the ends of that soil cement bentonite wall to the concrete training walls at the spillway structures. And then to the left of the Tittabawassee powerhouse or old powerhouse area, there'll be a sheet pile eye wall that will extend from the Tittabawassee spillway to the through the auxiliary spillway to the left abutment. All right, we'll move on to Sanford. So at Sanford, Sanford's a little different. We've got a new, we've got to completely reconstruct this embankment. The primary spillway gates will be all new here, but the rest of this embankment is really going to be constructed out of RCC. Again, that's the roller compacted concrete. There will be a very large auxiliary spillway, has a lot of capacity. And then the areas outside of that auxiliary spillway will be reinforced with this overtopping protection so that if you do get overtopping, that you're not eroding down an earth embankment section. And that really provides a lot of it's a big safety measure for this dam in particular. I think I mentioned over the low level outlets here already. Yeah, so you can go to this. Yeah, that's okay. You can go back to that slide, this next one here. So this slide really is all about how we designed or how we selected the design criteria for these dams and the capacity that they'll be able to handle. FEMA supports several approaches to selecting an inflow design flood, and the methods that are listed on here, they vary in their approach, some being more generalized, and as you get on the list, they could become more site specific and risk based. The incremental damage approach, which I think is number 3 here, that was used to select the IDF for these dams. We really want to find that sweet spot that provides the most cost effective solution. So we selected the IDFs for each dam such that the design results in sort of this diminishing incremental increase in consequence to damages downstream. And that really, what all that means is this plot on the right here. What that illustrates is you get this convergence of risk resulting from a flood where a dam fails versus where risk from a flood where it doesn't fail. And you want to find that spot where those two lines converge and use that to pick your IDF. That really allows you the most protection and reduces your risk downstream as much as possible. So this approach is really a great way to go for evaluating different flood protection options and comparing the costs and the benefits of each option. And you can kind of see in this photo down on the right on the bottom here, this is Sanford Dam during the flood, and you can really tell from this photo, you got this very low head across the dam. And can kind of get a sense of why that risk is low, picking the design flood and allowing the capacity there, but you want to make sure the dam stays intact. It illustrates, really well why designing as close to that convergence line as possible will result in the lowest risk downstream. So go ahead to the next slide here. All right, so this slide really kind of covers a lot of the numbers. There's a lot of work that went into this, a lot of site-specific studies, a lot of evaluations, a lot of CDF modeling to get to boiling down to this this slide here. But really, what this shows is the comparison between the capacity pre-flood to what we're looking at with our new restored spillways, both the primary spillways and the auxiliary spillway capacity added together. And so if you kind of go across the list here, you see really, there's a lot more capacity in the proposed designs. Smallwood here is listed. I think this it just kind of explain a little bit what that 40% means. That, is accounting for the Smallwood Dam has currently sort of an auxiliary spillway there, but it's really not a safe way to pass water. It's sort of this, very small riprap line channel that extends out into the far left embankment, which is all grass lined, and really can't count on that for capacity. So if you discount that as current capacity now and look at that again, you really end up somewhere around 100% of increase in capacity for Smallwood.
Carlin, just to give a quick time check, we're just past 6:20,
sure.
So we'll probably have to have a couple more minutes, and then we'll have to move on to the next part. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much done here, so I can turn it right over to Steve if you're ready.
Sure. All right. Thank you, Carlin. Sure. So we'll keep things moving here and go pretty quick. The inflow design flood, Carlin covered pretty well. The next part of this that we want to talk about specifically is the floodplain portion. So when we say floodplain here, we're generally referring to the 100-year floodplain. That's the land that would be inundated by a flood event that occurs on average once every 100 years. Essentially, that's a 1% chance storm that would happen. So it's a 1% chance in any given year. We also have a definition here for the National Flood Insurance Program. This is the federal program that FEMA administers, and this is the program that generates those flood maps. So if you've seen a 100-year flood map, that's the program that generates those. So just a couple terms we'll be talking about here. Want to get in a little bit to some past flood studies and the flow rates that we've evaluated here. There are two different tables here. The top table is for the PMF, which is the probable maximum flood. And what we're trying to demonstrate here, as you can see, is there's three different studies that we've referenced. There's a 1994 study, a 2011 study, and then a new 2021 study. That new 2021 study that Ayers and Associates produced includes flow information from 2014, 2017, and 2020 floods. And that information informs that there's a higher probable maximum flood based on the statistical analysis from those newer, larger storm events. So you're seeing an increase in that probable maximum flood calculation at each of those four dams. On the second table, the bottom table here, we look specifically at the 100-year storm on those top two. Prior to the flood event in 2020, the published 100-year storms for each of those dams is listed: Secord, Smallwood, Edenville, and Sanford. And then the 100-year flow rate based on that new statistical analysis that Ayers and Associates did following the 2020 flood. And I'll point out in this next row here, Edenville in particular, there is an estimate of the May 2020 flow rate that resulted in that Edenville failure was roughly equivalent to the 100-year storm. Downstream of that, the flow rates that were seen at Sanford Dam were closer to the 500-year storm as a result of the breach wave and the failure of the Edenville Dam upstream. For comparison purposes, I've also shown at the bottom here the 5,000-year flood, which is a storm event that has a 1 in 5,000 chance of happening in a given year. And if you look at those flow rates, they're obviously substantially higher than a 100-year storm. And then at the bottom is the actual ultimate dam capacity for each of those 4 dams. So this is just to demonstrate the additional safety that's being incorporated into the design of each of the 4 dams. So next, I want to talk a little bit specifically about Sanford Dam, primarily because that's one, the most downstream dam, and 2, that's the dam that's currently being permitted next through EGLE. Looking at the flow rates coming out of Sanford Dam, we did do an analysis of what those flow rates would look like if the dams are installed as designed, these new safer dams that have this additional capacity, versus what it would look like if the dams were not reconstructed. Really, those are the 2 options that we have to look at. We can either create a safe dam or not install a dam at all. And what you see here is that for storm events in that 50 and 100-year storm range, you're seeing that the flow rates, whether the dam's there or the dam's not, are effectively the same. Once you get up to some of those higher storm events, you do start seeing some reduction in the peak downstream, but these dams are not intended as flood control structures. The new dams are intended to essentially operate as run of the river. So flow coming in equals the flow coming out. And then at the bottom there, again, you have the new design capacity for the Sanford Dam relative to that 5,000-year storm. On the next slide here, this is just what's called a hydrograph, showing the flow rate on the left and the time on the bottom for a storm event. The one on the left is the 50-year storm. The orange line is if the dams are restored. The dark blue line is if the dams are not restored and it's left as just a river system. And you can see that those flow rates and the timing of the storm is roughly the same. On the right-hand graph, you have the 100-year storm. There you see a slight reduction in the peak flow if the dams are restored, but generally trying to mimic that 100-year storm, whether the dams are there or the dams are not there. And then lastly, talking about the floodplain permitting, this is under Part 31 of NREPA that EGLE administers. And for that floodplain permitting, we demonstrate that the dams show no harmful interference upstream of those dams, that they're not increasing flood stage upstream of the dams, and that the flow rates, with whether the dams are in place or the dams are not in place, is the same downstream of Sanford Dam. One thing I do want to mention is that the FEMA flood insurance study does require approval for changes to the floodplain. And so there has been a conditional letter of map revision for the detailed floodplain area only between Edenville and Sanford Dam. So as part of the permitting process, that has been submitted to FEMA to potentially revise that floodplain in just that stretch between Edenville and Sanford Dam. And this map on the right just kind of shows those extents. So with that, I can turn the presentation back over to EGLE.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me well. I know Mike Sizes should be pulling up his presentation right now, so I'll just really quickly introduce. See some good questions coming in. Please keep them coming in, and we'll get to as many as we can here at the end. And some of them are getting answered on the fly here. So Mike Size is our sort of our permit oversight guy on this project. He's also one of our dam safety engineers. So Mike, you ready to roll?
Yeah, is it coming through on your end? I
got you.
Okay, great. I can probably make up a little bit of time, but I'm going to talk fast, so you're going to have to listen faster. So as Jared said, I'm a regional engineer with the Water Resources Division and the Dam Safety Unit. And today I'm just going to lay out the permitting process, the Part 315 Dam Safety Statute requirements, and the criteria we look for in permit applications related to dams. So to give you all a brief description of the permitting process, should you ever need to submit an application yourself, typically a pre-application meeting is held, and this provides the applicant a list that specifies the information that's going to be required for a complete permit application. And this is typically based on some preliminary plans that are provided by the applicant. All permit applications are then submitted in EGLE's My Enviro website. And this is formerly the My Waters website for those who are familiar with that. And this is the same website in which you can submit comments during the public notice period. And that topic is going to be covered by Jacob a little bit later on. So after the department receives an application for a permit, we then determine whether the application is deemed administratively complete within 30 days. And if an application is not complete, then we inform the applicant of necessary information that is required. So after an application for a permit is considered to be administratively complete, we may request the applicant to clarify, amplify, or correct the information required. And then the applicant's got to provide that information to us. Following a determination that an application is administratively complete, the public notice is issued, and the department then begins the technical review period. So within about 60 days of the issuance of the public notice, the department makes a decision to permit the project, request further information, or reject the permit application. And should the department deny the permit, an appeal can be made. However, this occasion rarely occurs. So each of the 4 Lakes Task Force Joint Permit Applications, or JPAs, include the quantified impacts to regulated resources that the state of Michigan oversees. And these are, but not limited to, the Part 31 floodplains, Part 301 inland lakes and streams, Part 303 wetlands, and Part 315 dam safety. So each dam restoration project, as stated before, has its own application, and then some of these projects have separate pull-ahead applications associated with them. So what are the state of Michigan's requirements for dam applications? For permit applications, all submissions shall include information that the department deems necessary to administrate the Part 315 statute. Information that's typically submitted includes site investigation reports, design calcs, historic records, as well as the design drawings and specifications that are prepared by a licensed professional engineer. Minor permit modification requests are meant to alter an existing permit and require similar information be provided. However, the timeframes are slightly different though, as the department either approves or rejects the changes within 30 days after a request is made. So for the Edenville and Sanford Dam restoration projects, as well as all other projects, the department evaluates whether the work will have adverse effects on the public health, safety, welfare, property, or natural resources. So the dam safety program's role on these application reviews is with respect to safety, and we work with other personnel in our department to ensure that these other aspects are accounted for. The design standards per the Part 315 dam safety statute states that the minimum spillway capacity required for high hazard dams over 40 feet in Michigan is half of the probable maximum flood, or PMF. And the Association of State Dam Safety Officials recommends that a dam have a capacity to safely pass the potential maximum flood or a lesser flow in which the downstream impacts of a dam failure are not significantly different than the non-failure condition as mentioned earlier. So using an industry standard set by FEMA, the appropriate spillway capacity requirements for Secord, Smallwood, and Edenville were determined to be somewhere between the half and the 3/4 PMF. And this risk-informed decision-making process allows a dam owner and regulators to consider the risks associated with the hydrologic performance of the dams relative to other dam safety risks. And in this method, design flood is selected that assures a given level of tolerable risk is not exceeded. So the strengths of this method include providing dam owners and regulators the ability to assess the marginal value of increasing levels of flood protection against balancing capital investments in the risk reduction across a number of different failure modes. And then the design standard at Sanford Dam is a little different. an incremental consequence analysis was performed and identified that the flood for which the downstream consequences with and without failure are not significantly different as covered by Carlin and Steve. So due to the failures and the recommendations from the Association of State Dam Safety Officials, as well as Michigan's Dam Safety Task Force, the Four Lakes Task Force is carrying out a complete reevaluation of these dams based on the selected IDF discussed earlier. And these evaluations include each dam's hydrology, their hydraulics, the geotechnical stabilities, structural stabilities, mechanical functioning, as well as their operation, maintenance, and monitoring plans. So based on the potential failure modes of each dam, a specific design, operation, and maintenance plan is created, and that ensures adequate protections are made. And also included for the department's review are the construction and post-construction conditions. So the dam safety unit reviews the hydrology at each project, the subsequent inflow design flood selection based on that hydrology, and the hydraulic design and performance of the spillway structures based on the IDF. So here's a picture of the rainfall data for the site-specific probable maximum precipitation study, or PMP, mentioned by Steve earlier, that Ayers Associates put together. And this in turn is then used to develop the IDF for each dam. And based on the inflows, the new spillway design is created and evaluated. So here's a snip of the new primary spillways rating curve at Secord Dam. And based on the spillway configuration and discussed earlier, you can see that there is a drastic increase in spillway capacity over the existing conditions. Lastly, I'm a visual guy, so I like to see these to guarantee erosion and cavitation potential are minimized. 3D model of dam passing the IDF is created and easily depicts velocities of the water across the outlet structures. So geotechnical aspects of a dam that are evaluated and reviewed by the dam safety unit are the embankment seepage and the stability. So a soil boring plan was performed to assess the existing geotechnical characteristics of the dam. And from the data collected in that investigation, models are created that assess the seepage gradient and slope stability of the embankment for the existing construction and proposed conditions. These model outputs are then reviewed to ensure that the appropriate factors of safety are met for the different impoundment scenarios. Stability analyses are performed, and they were performed specifically on the spillway retaining walls, spillway overflow sections, concrete piers, and powerhouse structures. So using Army Corps engineers design references, the reinforced concrete designs were created to ensure that the minimum load factors were met for normal and construction conditions. And the bearing capacity of the foundation, as well as the settlement potential, are also evaluated in these analyses. The primary mechanical functions at these dams will be the spillway crest gates and the low-level outlets. So these components are assessed to make sure that there are redundancies in place and that proper failure conditions are established. Lastly, an operation and maintenance plan typically comprises activities that the owner should perform on a regular basis. And these activities fall into the following categories: inspection, performance monitoring, maintenance, and emergency planning. So with proper operation and maintenance of a dam, the owner can reduce deterioration, prolong the lifespan of the structure, and protect the public. So once all these facets are accounted for, reviewed and approved, then the dam safety unit can sign off on the application. And hopefully I made up a little bit of time. And with that, I'll pass it back to Jared.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. John, you can start pulling up your presentation there. Just really quick, I'll introduce John Baya. He's our floodplain engineer, actually out of Kalamazoo, but he's one of our most experienced staff in terms of the relatively complex sort of flood modeling that's going on here. And John's done a yeoman's job. So take it away, John.
Thanks a lot, Jared. John Baja, as Jared said, they're district engineer here in Kalamazoo. I'm helping out with this one just because of the nature of it and some of the complexities. So I'm just going to go through the basics here, what I'm thinking about when I'm reviewing some of this information, and a little bit of background about why we regulate floodplains. So bear with me. So I seem to not be able to advance my slides, Ryan.
Yeah, you might want to try one of the arrows or the space bar might advance it for you if you're having issues, or click on it. Yep, there you go.
All right, so I'll gloss over some of this a little bit because I think it's pretty well covered already by Mike and others, but I'm going to touch a little bit on what's a floodplain, why do we care about it, what's a floodway, why is it important to manage floodplains, Michigan's Part 31 floodplain program goals, what is the FEMA flood insurance map, which I think we've already pretty much covered, and then get into a little bit on how we deal with the reviews for these projects. And again, I'm mostly focusing on the two downstream dams, the Edenville and Sanford dams, because those are the ones under review right now. But similarly, we would have reviewed the other ones as well, the upstream Smallwood and Secord dams. So I think, as others have said, the 100-year floodplain is the land adjacent to a river, lake, or stream that is inundated by the water during a flood, which has a 1% chance of occurring in a given year. Now, obviously, for dam safety, they look beyond that, but for our regulations, we go up to the 100-year event. That is what we regulate to under Part 31. Obviously, every water body has a floodplain, whether it's mapped or regulated or not. So just be aware of that. Just because it's not mapped doesn't mean it's not there. Floodways, a river or channel that portions of the floodplain are reasonably required to carry and discharge the 100-year flood. So the floodway here has not been delineated by FEMA's mapping system, but it does exist. Every water body or river or stream has a floodway. And it's generally where most of the water is moving with such velocity that could be dangerous to human health and safety. Structures built there could be in trouble, that sort of thing. So as far as why do we manage floodplains, I think probably everyone on the call knows something about this and why we want to deal with this. But floods are the most common natural disaster in the U.S. and probably most of the world. About 200 Americans lose their lives every year from flooding. 90% of all presidential declarations are from flooding. Approximately 6% of Michigan's land is flood prone, and that we're talking about up to the 100-year event, including about 200,000 buildings. So that's a fairly large chunk of the economy, potentially, that's at risk from flooding. Undeveloped floodplains support many natural resources, wetlands, wildlife, groundwater recharge, that sort of thing. And we have had some presidential declarations recently. I think we're going to get some more in the UP coming up here soon, or at least state level. I'm going to skip over this. I think we've covered what NREPA is at this point. I work for the Water Resources Division. Again, I think we probably have a good handle on what that is at this point. As far as the programs go, I think Mike pretty much touched on these, but I'm typically looking at these projects from the Part 31 standpoint. Obviously, they're being reviewed by others for these other regulatory programs. Program goals of Part 31 from a floodplain standpoint is to protect people and property damage from flooding, to reduce future flood losses in Michigan, and preserve the natural functions of rivers and their floodplains. Under the state's regulatory authority found in Part 31, any occupation, construction, filling, grade changes within a floodplain or river or stream that has a drainage area of 2 square miles or greater requires permitting and review. So floodway development is especially important, or takes a higher level of review. And essentially a dam is a floodway development in some ways. So it is affecting the flood flows, it's affecting everything around it. I'm going to skip over this. I think we don't know how to deal with flood maps at this point. I think we've already touched on what the National Flood Insurance Program is. But from a Part 31 standpoint, we have to be especially aware of these situations where we're in an NFIP community and we're dealing with a FEMA detailed study area, which we are for a portion of this project. So this is a little wordy, and I apologize for that, but I'll kind of gloss over some of it or just touch on the high points. These are essentially my thoughts that I came up with as I was going through this process today and yesterday. But as far as PERT 31 is concerned, all these projects are being modeled using HECRAS, which is the same program that FEMA uses to develop the firm maps. Under PERT 31, the modeling has to show no change or lowering of the previously established base flood elevations from the existing conditions. So all I'm trying to say there is to permit something under PERT 31, we have to be assured that the elevations of the flooding are either going to remain the same or be lower. We can't permit something with an increase in flood stage or increase in flood elevation unless those elevation changes are contained to the applicant's property, generally speaking. For most of these projects, existing conditions refer to the pre-disaster conditions of all 4 dams in the surrounding areas. For Part 31 reviews, flood flows have been updated to match the current hydrology. I think Steve pretty much touched on that at length already. Generally, dams regulated by EGLE under Part 31 or Part 315, excuse me, operate as run of the river, as I think others have said as well. So under this operational methodology, the amount of water flowing into the impoundment must be released by the operation of the dam. So we cannot retain a bunch of water. In order to consider a Part 31 permit for such projects, EGLE has to ensure that the work will not cause a harmful interference and will not increase flood elevations. This is typically demonstrated by modeling for projects impacting the river, channel, or floodway. Part 31 review of modeling submitted for permit applications is an in-depth process and involves verifying all model inputs and outputs. So that sounds easy, but this is really where we get down to the nuts and bolts of it. Generally speaking, when I'm looking at a HECRAS model, I'm going to go through everything in the model to the best of my ability, verify the outputs and inputs, make sure that the assumptions are correct. If I find issues with it or have questions, generally I'm reaching out to Steve, we discuss them and we go through them and figure out if anything needs to be changed, that sort of thing. Existing conditions starting point is pre-disaster configuration of these dams in all cases, which we established early in the process with 4 lakes. These are pretty much the same. The Smallwood and Secord dams are very similar as far as how we approach them from a Part 31 standpoint. They're both in approximate zone A areas, so that makes it a little easier to deal with from the FEMA regulation side of things. They're both proposed to be repaired and modified to meet current standards. The Edenville Dam is located just upstream of a detailed study area, which Steve mentioned earlier. And that one needs to go through the conditional letter of map revision process with FEMA, whereas FEMA is going to review the modeling. I've already reviewed it. They will concur or ask questions and go through it because there's potential for that one to change elevations between the 2 dams, the Edenville and the Sanford Dam. The Sanford Dam is located just downstream of FEMA detailed study areas. So we have been able to avoid a CLOMAR on that one, but there will be additional things required from FEMA and they are reviewing that as well. So a little bit of a summary here, I guess. Following the failure of the dams, I think as others have mentioned, the area is fairly unstable. Leaving it as is currently is not really an option. Significant impacts to the floodplain and floodway often require hydraulic modeling, which we've gone through on every one of these so far. We're typically focused on potential floodplain elevation increases on the upstream side of a proposed project, but we also need to look at them from a potential for downstream impacts, which I think is what the premise of most of tonight is about. For Edenville and Sanford dams, both EGLE and FEMA are involved in the review of the proposed changes. So we're both reviewing those. FEMA has their process, we have our process, and so on. I think I already touched on that. I guess I'll hit on this point. EGLE cannot issue a permit for a project that increases floodplain elevations on existing conditions, on neighbors, properties, or structures. So all I'm trying to say there is, we cannot issue a permit when there's potentially increases on insurable structures or other properties not owned by the applicant. And I think we've pretty much touched on how these dams are going to be operated, run of the river. Yeah, I think that's it. As far as questions, I know we're going to go through a bunch of questions tonight, but if you have additional questions, you want to talk about something, just feel free to reach out to me anytime. I will get back to you if you get my voicemail. And I think that's all I had, Jared.
There we go. I'm unmuted. Thanks, John. Sorry, I was typing an answer to a question, so I got us a little behind.
No, no problem. I probably went through that a little quickly.
No, that was good. Thank you. Jacob Brand is gonna talk a little bit about, it got mentioned earlier, but we have a permitting database. And so he's going to talk about ways that you can participate in the sort of upcoming public notice process and make sure that your sort of voice is heard on the during that process. So go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, as Jared said, my name is Jake Brand. I am the environmental quality analyst that has been assigned to Midland County, and I'm going to be speaking about the public notices today. Once EGLE has gone through and reviewed all of the applicant information and we've deemed it administratively complete, there are two main processes in which the stakeholders can become involved. The first of which is that public notice period. It's a period that typically lasts 20 days, and the stakeholders within the region who are going to be impacted by the project, or if people want to make comments outside of the project area, they're able to do so. The second, which is a public hearing, they're a little less frequent than what the public notices are. And if a public hearing is being held, you typically find out in your local newspapers, or you can go to the EGLE website. We have a calendar that has all the information on upcoming public hearings. And it typically has a link where you can sign up for those public hearings, and you do need to sign up to make comments throughout that hearing. And then after the hearing, there is a 10-day comment period, which you can put more comments in, even if you've applied and put a comment in for the public notice period. So the comments must be submitted online or by mail, and they must be submitted during the comment period. Any comments submitted outside of that period will not be considered. So make sure that you get those comments in on time. For the dams, all written comments should be addressed to the dam safety unit. The address is below, so it's 525 West Allegan Street in Lansing. So I'm going to be walking everyone through how to submit a comment online. And the first thing that you're going to want to do is go to the My Enviro portal homepage. It's important to note that you do not need to create an account in order to make a public notice comment. Your first step after coming to this homepage is on the right-hand side, there is a public notice search. And once you click on that public notice search, it'll take you to a page that has a list of all of the applications that are currently on public notice. So to kind of filter through this, you have two different options. The first of which is the first arrow in the upper right-hand corner. That drop down will show you all the tabs that are currently displayed on the screen. So you can filter by application number, the applicant or permittee, the site, the county, or you can just type in where those filter bars are, what site that you're looking for. If you don't know the site, you can narrow it down by the county and scroll through everything that's available in that county. For Sanford Dam, the site name is 56 Sanford Dam, Midland. So if you type that into the site, once this is on public notice, it'll take you right to the page. And similarly for Edenville Dam, if you type in the site name 26 Edenville Dam - Gladwin, it'll take you there, or you can search by the application number. You do not need to search by both of them. One or the other will take you to the proper application for the public notice. So once you're there, you're going to click on the side where it says view and submit comments. And then it'll take you to a page that shows you the details, the documents, and add comment. The details page will tell you the notice type. So public notice, it's an application. It'll tell you who the applicant is, the application number, the permittee, and then it'll tell you what EGLE staff is in charge of this public notice. If you click on the documents page, it'll take you to a list where it shows our PN master, which is a breakdown of basically what this application is being public noticed for. It'll give you the plans, so you're able to review the plans. And then lastly, it'll have the application. It's important that you need to click the download on the right-hand side of the screen. If you just click where it says PN master or the application number, nothing will happen. And then you'll need to go into your downloads folder, or if you have the new Google, it'll be up in the upper right-hand corner. So the big thing is adding a comment. So you need to click on that third tab on the right-hand side. And then it'll take you to this page here. So there are 3 categories that need to happen. So we need to have your name, we need an email address, and then we need your comment within that comment box. You do have the opportunity to submit extra files and attachments. So we have 2 ways that you can do that. The first of which is the drop here to upload. To do that, you go into your file explorer, you click on your file one time, and then you drag it to this, this box over here. And once you let go, it'll start to upload your file. The other of which is the choose file option. If you click on this, it'll pop up a file explorer where you would click on it and then you would hit upload. So once you have your name, the email, and your comment, it's important to remember to hit the submit button. If you forget to do that, your comment will not be uploaded to the file. So making your comments count, it's important to know that this is not a vote on whether or not you want this project to occur. The point of your comment is to provide supporting documents. You need to be factual and specific, and then be concise. If you're only using that comment box, you only have 2,000 characters. If you want to provide those longer comments, you need to use and utilize the attachment boxes that I just showed you. And then make your comments based on the regulatory criteria that have been discussed in the previous presentations. So you can talk about the cumulative impacts of the project, talk about reducing the impacts, the public trust impacts. And then lastly, this is an opportunity for people to provide information that the applicant or the state may not be aware of within the area. A lot of people have been within the area for a long time. They've seen some things. This is your opportunity to tell us about those. I have also done some useful links here. So if you want to learn more about inland lakes and streams, wetland protection, the dam safety, or just how to use the MyEnviro portal for public commenting, or if you have an application to put in, just follow these links and it'll take you to the pertinent information. That's all I have, Jared.
All right, thanks, Jake. Yeah, so I think we're going to move on to a Q&A portion of the evening, I guess. So Ryan can join me. So we got all of our panelists on there. So panelists, you can turn your cameras back on, and then I think I'll just jump in here. Maybe a good place to start would be, there was a question typed in that was related to helping people understand what the correlation is between flow rates and flood elevations, in terms of flood elevation being the thing that impacts people's lives. So anyone who wants to jump on and address that.
I think I took a stab at that one, Jared. I think what he's getting at is most likely he wants to know the flood depths down in Midland area, which you could certainly put something to that together. I think it'd be beyond the kind of review that we're doing here. We could certainly put something together that would give flood depths downstream of the dams, but I think the outlet of Sanford's only about 40% of what's going through Midland. So
yeah, I think the question is related to, so if we're seeing similar flood flows, are we going to see similar flood levels? Does that make sense, right? So yeah,
and we would. I mean, right now all the modeling shows generally lowering of the flood elevations slightly, or basically the same. If we're talking about the 2 lower dams, the upper dam's a little different, but it won't be increased significantly.
Okay.
I think the modeling does show a little bit increase, but those increases are contained to the 4 Lakes Task Force properties. So.
Okay. So another question that came in. So we talked a little bit about run of the river, sort of what goes into the basin comes out of the basin. I'm just going to jump on that a little bit, and then if anyone else wants to add anything, please do. So I had mentioned that, and I think John put a list up there, that, I mean, this is being reviewed under a number of statutes. It's wetlands, it's the Inland Lakes and Streams Act, which are primarily resource-based, environmental. It's the dam safety, and also floodplains. And at the end of the day, if you to permit any type of dam in the state of Michigan, it almost has to be permitted as run of the river, meaning they're not flood control dams. They're not designed to be that. They're designed to essentially they're not going to flood anyone upstream. They're not going to flood anyone downstream. And so to balance out all of those statutes, it almost has to be that what goes in comes out. It's permitted as a run of the river thing. And so the reason for that is a few different things. One is anytime you back water up behind a dam, you're decreasing your capacity to hold flows in the future. And so from a safety standpoint, it's important that we don't surcharge the dam. From an environmental standpoint, drawing the dams down at times of year when it would help the spring when we get our main flooding events also happen to be fish spawning times. And so to fit underneath all of those statutes and to balance all of those factors, essentially the goal is to permit something where it's not affecting flooding for anyone upstream or downstream, flows upstream or downstream. And that's why it's called run of the river. That's also a policy through DNR that they encourage run of the river management. So anyone else want to jump in on that?
The only thing that I do have a question here that is along those lines, Jared, that maybe someone could answer. So at what points will measurements be taken to determine the depth and flow in the river to ensure compliance with running the river? So I'm assuming this is after it's been established. Will there be any monitoring, or can anyone answer that one, or Jared or Mike?
I can take a quick stab at it, but we can definitely get Four Lakes input as well. So typically, how we measure if you're achieving run of river in an impoundment behind the dam is that the water level will remain more or less static. If the water level is increasing, beyond what's predicted by the hydraulic capacity of the dam, that would indicate that you are storing more water than you're releasing, right? And then, or conversely, if the water level was lowering during a flood, you'd be expected that that you're releasing more water than is coming in from the upstream watershed. So, the definition of run of river is instantaneous inflow equals instantaneous outflow. So when you've achieved that, your water level kind of reacts in the way that you expect from the hydraulic rating curves for the dam. So, at 5,000 CFS, say you expect an elevation in the pond. If you're higher than that, you're probably not passing enough flow. If you're lower than that, you're probably passing too much flow. So I don't think that we don't typically go out and measure during a flood, and say, hey, you could, you need to make small tweaks as long as the dam is operated in a way that's not exacerbating flooding or causing risk at the dam. And then, during normal flows, if it's more or less maintaining the lake levels that it's supposed to maintain, we consider that run a river. And then if anybody wants to chime in, go ahead.
Well, I think just you've given the kind of high level just in terms of operationally. I think a little intent of the question is how are we measuring it specifically? So I would say that on every dam we have flow and depth kind of being measured, as well as we've installed USGS. We haven't installed, but work with USGS on gauges, and there's a significant amount of levels and flows being measured above each dam, and with that, they're actually available to the public as we build them out, and they're on our website under the operations group if people want to look at them. And obviously, we have to be predictive on the flow rates too, so those goes into the algorithms. I think Carlin mentioned that we have these low flow outlets. So when we're running at normal river rate, it's it's monitored and almost a control system. When you start to get elevated rates up to the 100-year flood, it goes from the low level outlets, and we start to kind of more aggressively use the spillways, and those are measured and tracked as well. So we have measurements upstream and then downstream, and then we're working with the downstream with the Army Corps to have them start to start to put their data in as well, and working with USGS to get the more predictive stuff downstream as well. But our goal is to run of the river, so the flows going in is the same as going out, and working through that and getting the measurements around that to operate to the regime that EGLE expects. And we are making that public so that the emergency action planning groups can see that, and it's available for people to kind of monitor.
Great. So one of the questions was related to, and we could do another question while we're pulling it up, but I don't know, we had a lot of shop talk that kind of ran through some of the different components of the dams. The question was about cutoff walls and tow drains and the overflow channels. And so I don't know if we've got on a slide somewhere one of those diagrams, and we could just run through the major components of what's there and describe people what their function is.
Sure, maybe Steve, could you bring up the Sanford Dam, and then Carla maybe just walk through each of those functions so it makes sense to do.
Yeah, I would say actually if we can maybe pull up the Edenville Dam slide, because I think it's got a little of everything.
Okay.
Sanford's got some of it. Yeah, and then we can talk about those in more detail.
Okay. And while you guys are working on that, I would just reemphasize one of the points that John really hit on, is that, there's been a ton of very detailed technical work on this to get it right. And, at the end of the day, we can't permit something that's going to increase flooding on people downstream or upstream. We can't permit something that isn't safe. And then in this case, I think we're still kind of hoping that, we'll see a change in the dam safety regulation here in this state, but Four Lakes Task Force went ahead and designed to the standard that we're hoping the law will get changed to. So at the end of the day, we can't put our names on something that isn't safe, at least to a very, very high standard, or that's going to cause flooding problems on anyone else, upstream, downstream, on the lakes. So take it away, Carlin. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the question specifically was about cutoff walls and tow drains, right? So I think we can hit on those two things first here. So Edenville being a good example, you've got the several sections of earth embankment. Talk about cutoff walls first here. Really what that is, the soil cement bentonite cutoff wall, specifically at Edenville and sheet piling elsewhere. The purpose of that really is to prevent seepage, so water that's in the lake from infiltrating through the embankment section and then exiting the embankment on the downstream side. And in earthfill dams, oftentimes one of the failure modes that you'll see is that if you've got real high seepage gradients, you can start to pick up material with that water flowing through the dam and start to mobilize and migrate fines, clay particles, silt particles, will get picked up by that water and moved out of the dam, and it comes out on the tow side or downstream side. And once that starts happening, it can develop into what we call a pipe, and it can lead to a failure of that embankment section. And so what we want to do, kind of two real purposes of having that cutoff wall in place. One, it reduces the ability for that seepage to travel through the embankment and create that condition. And it also draws down the phreatic surface, or basically with the groundwater elevation on the downstream side of the dam, and it really improves the global stability against sliding failures for the embankment itself. So really a couple of purposes for that wall. And it's a pretty common component for most dams to have some sort of hydraulic cutoff. And in this case, again, at Edenville, it's that soil cement bentonite wall. Really, it's the vertical column of low permeability mixed soil, powdered bentonite and cement. And then When you get down to the toe, sometimes these wells really are not designed to be perfectly impermeable. So you're going to have a little bit of leakage through there, but it really, to do its job right, doesn't need to be perfectly impermeable. So we kind of add this toe drain and granular filter system on the downstream side as a belt and suspenders operation to kind of double up on that. And really what that's doing is just collecting any water that does make it through. And in some cases at these dams, we do have some regional groundwater that's elevated that does make it into the near the toe area. So pick that water up, get it into a pipe and safely discharge it back out into the river and do that in a safe manner. There are other components here that we want to touch on. I don't know how much we want to get into gates and things, but as far as embankment improvements, that kind of covers what we're doing.
No, I think that was good. No, I think that was fine, and I think that was really important. I mean, at the end of the day, like, wet soils are weaker than dry soils, right? And so the whole goal is to keep that downstream side. I mean, seepage is kryptonite to these dams, so it's part of the safety feature of what's being designed. So Ryan, did you have another question queued up that you wanted to ask? Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Yeah, I have a good one here. And this one's probably for Mike or Luke. So this is related to dam maintenance. So what's in place to ensure the dam owner maintains a high level of maintenance compliance? And what happens if they don't keep up with that? And what are the limits or action points if they don't, keep up with maintenance of the dam? Can you speak to that at all?
We were playing chicken there to see who would.
Just trying to find the mute button. Go ahead, Luke. All right. So for part 315, and this is a part 307 structure, there are inspection report frequencies that are required. So these being high hazard dams, an inspection report needs to be submitted to the dam safety unit currently every 3 years. As Jared alluded to earlier, we are trying to increase that frequency with some new legislation, and should that pass, then it'd be a yearly inspection cycle. So we would be appraised of the dam's current condition, any deficiencies, and would be working continuously with Forlikes Task Force to make sure that any of those deficiencies are adequately addressed.
Yeah, and I would just add that, I mean, there's a regulatory requirement you're defining. We've advocated for greater frequencies and standards just like you have. And, the Association of Dam Safety Engineers have a viewpoint too. And we're trying to follow those guidelines to be elevated a little higher than what the state aspires to. And hopefully the legislation will catch up. But we'll be in compliance or better than that. And we've brought people in that are it's not a bunch of local people writing this, is people that have expertise in dam operations that helping us build this up.
All right, thank you. We're getting close to time. It looks like I have one more question that either hasn't been answered privately or that we've read aloud. So this is probably going to be the last one. In a 100-year rain event, will there be any flooding of any properties on the 4 lakes? Can we speak to that at all? Do we know that? Thoughts?
I don't believe there will be. Go ahead, Steve. You probably know more about than me.
I was going to say, generally, the floodplain elevations are at or below what was there presently, what's on the current FEMA floodplain map. There are areas where you have tributaries or localized flooding that aren't really attributed to the dams or to the waterway, but generally it would be a reduction in flood risk as a result of the increased capacity and the decrease in hazard created by the dams.
All right.
So Ryan, there's one more question, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, and I think there are folks on that know a lot more about it than I do, but I think it's an important piece of information. One of the things we haven't talked about is that there is a Army Corps study going on downstream of these dam projects and unrelated to it, in terms of some ways to address potential flooding down in Midland and those areas. So if we've got someone that's a little more informed about that than I am, that could just kind of just at least describe that or confirm that what I said is correct, that would be helpful.
Yeah, there maybe, unless I'll do it from a point of view of I'm on the committee that, you know, or an ad hoc member on the, it's a Midland County sponsored event with the Midland Business Alliance, and it's an Army Corps project, and they're doing essentially surveying the whole, most of the river system down stream of Sanford Dam, but also in the Chippewa on the Pine and through Midland County, and they're doing the hydrology and hydraulics to kind of model that, to look at risk reduction and stuff to work with that. We are involved with them because the studies we've done, we've committed to provide the hydrographs. Steve showed some of them, and the data that allows them to do the modeling downstream. The Sanford, you know, there's a Sanford River, it connects quickly to the Salt River, so the Army Corps has to add that. And then there's the Pine and the Chippewa, and so there's sturgeon and snake and all those others that are needed to be put in. It's the largest, as the Army Corps, as I said in a meeting, was the largest hydrology study that they've done relative to looking at a basin in one kind of target. So it's pretty significant, and we've tried to work there to make sure that we're running to the river and being neutral for those studies. But it's been going on for the last year and a half, and it's got a few more years to go.
Great, perfect. Thanks, Dave. I'm all set, Ryan. So.
All right, perfect. Yeah, thank you all. Thanks, Jared. Thanks to all of our panelists and our presenters tonight, and to all of you for taking the time out of your Thursday night to participate in this informational session. Last thing I just want to leave you with is a reminder that this webinar or this informational session was recorded. We'll be closed captioning that, and it'll be posted on EGLE's YouTube page. So keep an eye out for it. With that, yeah, thank you all, and I hope you all have a great rest of your evening.